Seeing all of you here today in this setting and on this campus would make my father extremely happy. Having a few months between my father's passing and this memorial service has really been a blessing. It has allowed me the time and the space to really absorb the memories that friends and colleagues have shared, marry them with my own experience of him, and collectively they have brought my father into his full glory. This time helped me place all of his life in its true perspective and give everything its proper due. My dad was many things. He would have loved that. When I think of adjectives to describe him, his values and the ways in which he lived them, so many examples come to mind. He had a quiet, determined way of working towards and achieving his goals, an extremely positive spirit and outlook, valued community and culture, and was wicked smart. But he also had a wonderful sense of humor, a hearty laugh, an appetite to match, and was exceedingly curious. But at the beginning of it all, he was a young Chinese man, eager to pursue his academic passions, encouraged by his father to come to the United States. So he was Iowa-bound. Probably not a big population of folks that looked like him. Certainly not a lot of food to his liking. And culture and customs so unfamiliar to him. He persevered, and I'm sure it was all done with complete positivity. But he understood the importance of community and culture as it shapes your development, how you see the world, and provides the societal norms that one is accustomed to. I believe that is why he helped foster so many foreign students and visiting scholars when they came to Caltech. If he could ease their path into the American way, they could focus more on why they would come and build the communities that would bring them comfort and help them prosper. Together with my mom, they helped with housing, providing everyday items for their apartments, getting started in our banking system, hosting meals of food and conversation that made them miss home just a little less. My mother would help them get their driver's license by taking them for their written test and then out on the road in her car to acquire the skills needed to succeed. It dawned on me as I reflected on the sheer number of people she helped teach how to drive that this might have contributed to how nervous a passenger she eventually turned out to be. My father also loved to tell stories, and he shared anecdotes or factoids that he found interesting, educational, amusing, or just genius. He would actually tell his favorite stories over and over again. And honestly, I sometimes wondered if he only did this with me, or if he subjected many of you to this as well. Hey Mal, have I told you about the fellow who spoke before Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg and what he said to him on the train the next day? Well, let me just say that I'd heard that one a few dozen times, but it was clear that he was about to be told again. He'd look at my face for a second, pretend to care about my answer, and then he'd launch into it. Now, one can get a little frustrated being asked to sit and listen to a story being told again and again. But over time, I realized that if you just sit in this space with him and had the patience to let him get from the start to the finish, the joy in this for the listener was actually seeing the joy it brought him to tell the story. To him, the story was that good, and it deserved to be shared over and over. Because why not experience that good of a story over and over? And he wanted to do it with you, and that was the point. And it just took me so long to get it. On other occasions, my husband Michael and I would sit with my dad after dinner, and long talks would ensue. He always let my dad drive these conversations, and there was one that seemed to surface more often than others. It always started out by testing us out on some pretty basic math. Do you know what a prime number is? Really? You do? Okay, tell me. And after telling him, he'd reply, that's correct. Okay, so now that we have a basic level of understanding on which to move forward, he would then continue to share this theorem of his about prime numbers. And then he'd write out the series, explain the exceptions, and then he'd make you write them out. And we would save these little scraps of paper, because he told us to do that. And then on some subsequent trip, he'd say, "Do you know what prime number is?" We have these scraps of paper. This was a bit more exasperating to me than the Lincoln Gettysburg story, but I would receive a gentle elbow nudge from Michael to sit and indulge. My dad also had a keen sense of curiosity. He read the LA Times every day with intense interest, and it made him ponder the troubles of the world as well as the current events in which we live. He was very knowledgeable about so many topics. I often wondered how his brain had the space for it all. He was curious about language as well as sports. He would say little phrases in German, test out his Cantonese in restaurants, and quip about all the really strange exceptions in the English language. Once when we were watching a basketball game on TV, he walked by and stopped. He sat, he watched for a bit, and then he got up and he moved on to his office. But he would glean just enough to know what was going on, which teams were which, who some of the players were, and what was going on. One time he said, "Wow, that Reggie Miller, he sure is something." And he's a basketball player. We were saying, "Yeah, he really is, Dad, but it's Reggie Miller." He paused, he thought for a second, he said, "Well, it really should be Reggie Miller." We thought, he's right. And to this day, we call him Reggie Miller. There are so many sayings that have cemented their way into my family's vernacular that come directly from him. He was always keen to try something just to see. What is a theory without experimentation? And he said that directly after accelerating into a dip in a sandpass squall intersection to bottom out the car, much to my mother's dismay. To this day, I do not know what theory was being tested out, but on that day, another TYRism was added to my vocabulary. What is a theory without experimentation? He also loved factoids and would continuously ask you these over and over. Do you know the tree whose name has only one of the 5 vowels, but has it 4 times? Do you know? Do you know the 4 English words that end in D-O-U-S? He was amused by these little gems, and then he'd want you to ask other people. See if they know, see if they know. This was endless amusement for him. Parking, that was always a fun adventure with my dad. One of the first times I drove him to the campus, he had me enter a driveway from California Boulevard, then turn into the little dead end cul-de-sac, which is clearly only meant for loading and unloading and trash dumpsters. And he'd have me stop at the cement poles that come out of the ground so you don't enter the olive walk. And I was like, he said, "Hang up the blue card and let's go." So we were clearly parked very illegally, but it was definitely the closest point to the door of the Thomas building. It's only 50 yards away. We got out, and he with his cane, and up drives Caltech security, and I was bracing myself for the confrontation and the reprimand. "Hello, Professor Wu, how are you? I haven't seen you in so long, we've missed you. Glad to see you." I was like, oh, okay, this works for him, and he's been doing it for a long time. One Christmas, we got our boys these little remote control speedboats, and we decided the best place to play with them was in the pond in front of the Milliken Library. It wasn't but 10 minutes before security put a stop to that. Perhaps if my dad had been with us, the entire experience would have been different. The world just worked for him, and let me add that if an objective wasn't achieved on the first try, he'd just circle back and try a different approach. I saw this over and over again. He wouldn't get too frustrated or defeated. He'd just think it through, change his tactic. He was tenacious, and in more cases than not, he eventually got what he was after. It was remarkable and amazing to watch. Michael would say that he was just a force of nature, and that he could bend metal with his will. So bending metal became another TYRism. My dad was also a doting grandpa. We have lots of memories of our boys running around my parents' backyard, drawing all over their chalkboard, which was not really meant as a toy for them, making altogether too much noise, sometimes asked to recite the Gettysburg Address, but somehow never asked about prime numbers. Of course, eating lots of good Chinese food came with the territory, albeit sea cucumber was not a favorite, which led to another TYRism, You don't know what you're missing. Sitting around the kitchen table folding dumplings is one of their fondest memories. This is pure joy in eating as many as one's stomach can hold. It's a tradition we are now passing on to Maceo, our grandson. Unfortunately, at this point in time, the 2-year-old is calling them ducklings. So when we say we are folding and cooking and then eating ducklings, we chuckle a little and then we cringe a lot. As my dad aged and daily tasks became more difficult and his mobility more restricted, he found pretty ingenious ways to rig things to work in his favor. His independence and disciplined habits served him well. Who knew there were so many clever ways in which rubber bands, strings, binder clips, spare bags, extra pieces of wood, and chopsticks could be used. And I'll share that my personal favorite is keeping a pair of chopsticks in the potato chip bag. These small things not only made his life easier, but made it so he could just do his thing, rarely interrupted. But the true fact is he'd been doing these cheats for much of his life, just on a grander scale. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my mother. She was a force all her own, and their partnership was something to behold. Much of my father's success was hers as well, and we lost her too soon. I will close here. These are just a few stories of how my father and I interacted. He lived a long and wonderful life, filled with meaning and purpose. I had a front row seat to some really valuable life lessons. He was principled and disciplined, showed grace and compassion with others. Personal character was paramount to him. Whenever life handed him a lemon, he would say, "Such is life," and then let it go. I probably should have paid more attention, learned even more, but I know what we had was more than enough. I was lucky to have him, and I will miss him.